Welcome to Book Rising, a podcast by the Radical Books Collective.
Hello and welcome. My name is Meg Arenberg, and I'm your host for today's episode of Book Rising, the podcast of the Radical Books Collective. Intended to rhyme with uprising, the Book Rising is a collection of progressive conversations about books, publishing, and writing. Today I'm delighted to kick off a sub-series of episodes focused on the publishing side of things, with a conversation with Walter Bgoya, the founder of Tanzania's path-breaking independent press, Mkuki na Nyota, which has just completed its 40th year of producing relevant, beautiful, and affordable books against the steep odds of independent publishing in Africa. At the halfway mark, we are joined by Mkuki Bgoya, the press's current creative director, to talk about Mkuki na Nyota's current projects and the future of publishing in Tanzania and across the continent. Mzee Walter Bgoya, welcome to Book Rising.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just delighted to have this chance to talk to you. Let me start by congratulating you on behalf of the Radical Books Collective, a bit belatedly, on the 40th anniversary of Mkuki na Nyota, the press that you founded in Dar es Salaam in 1981. This is an incredible testament to your resilience and commitment to the project of nurturing independent cultural production in Tanzania and Africa more broadly. Hongera sana. Congratulations truly for reaching this landmark.
Cool, asante sana.
I do want to talk about Mkuki na Nyota's current projects and plans for the future, but I thought we could start by talking about the early years. If you could tell us a bit of your own story, how you got into publishing in the first place and how Mkuki na Nyota came to be.
Right, okay. I finished school, university in Kansas, the US in 1965 and went back to Tanzania. In 1966, I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and worked there for about 7 years before I joined publishing. When I was working in the Foreign Ministry, I was mostly working on African affairs, which was support of the national liberation movements and so on. And I worked in the embassy in Ethiopia and in China, which also were represented in Vietnam and North Korea and so on. But I came back to Tanzania in 1971, and I thought, although the work was interesting there, I thought I could not really see myself doing that for the rest of my life. So I joined the Tanzania Publishing House in 1972 and started publishing. It was a state publishing company doing mostly textbooks, but I was more interested in books, academic books, scholarly books, basically books that were important in terms of what our countries were going through, our visions of the future. And then, of course, Tanzania at this time had adopted the Arusha Declaration, blueprint for socialism and self-reliance. And I thought my work would be basically to advance the cause of socialism and self-reliance in Tanzania. While in TPH, we published How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which was a very, very important book that basically shaped much of the debates and discussions in the 70s about Africa, about African development, about African liberation, and so on. But I worked there for a number of years, about 18 years. And then at this time we had, particularly in the 80s, a very difficult time in Tanzania with the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank, which actually decimated very much our companies' finances, not just our companies, but basically all the social services in Tanzania. It was very, very, very difficult at this time. The Tanzania shilling was so devalued that almost all the working capital we had was wiped out. And so we really could not continue to publish. Most of the problems were the printing industry. They could not get spare parts. Paper was scarce. and all the other consumer boards in the printing industry, inks and so on, were just unavailable. If they were available, they're too expensive, and we couldn't therefore actually continue to publish books in Tanzania. So I thought there was no point in remaining there. So I started working on Mkuki and Nyota, and started very modestly with basically children's books, 2 or 3 children's books. But they gave me a chance to think and to prepare to do more interesting work. Continuation of the work we had been doing in Tanzania Publishing House, mostly what you could call left-leaning books, progressive books. At the time, there was a lot of discussions and debates at the university in Salaam in the 60s, which led to some of the significant publications also that we published there. And when I went to Mkuki and Nyota, I went with the authors and with the work that we had been doing. So that's in short what set us doing what we're doing now. But I'd like to just point out here that we had basically 3 guidelines. One, that we wanted to do relevant books. And by relevance means relevance to the African condition, Tanzanian situation. And we said beautiful books. We were also very keen to publish books that were beautiful in the sense that they were presentable, in the sense that they could compete in terms of the quality of publication with the other books published elsewhere.
Right.
And then we said affordable books, because that also is important.
So I'm glad you brought up Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa as one example. I attended some of the celebratory events last month that were commemorating your anniversary, and I remember listening to Kenyan poet Abdulatif Abdallah commenting on the incredibly important role that you personally played for activists like himself who were fighting for social justice in Kenya, and that relationship that you had with many radical thinkers at the University of Dar es Salaam at the time. So, and under your leadership, obviously at TPH, you were publishing these texts like Rodney's book in 1972, and Issa Shivji's Tanzania, the Silent Class Struggle was also published during that time. And I'd love to hear just a little more especially about those radical years in Dar es Salaam, and the relationship between publishing and those leftist movements, which were so vibrant at that time at the university.
Well, it's interesting to sometimes ask myself whether I'm a publisher or I'm an activist. But I think I saw publishing as part of activism, actually. That what we were doing was to take those ideas that were being discussed and debated, and then have them in books so that people could read the books, and therefore continue to discuss, continue to debate. Okay, so and then of course the thing is, it was a choice I made, and I think these are the choices publishers make. What do you want to publish? Who do you want to publish for? I mean, if you want, for instance, to publish frivolous stuff that may sell and make money, but it's not really interesting in terms of what people are doing in terms of trying to improve their lives. And I'm not talking improving their lives only on a material basis, but to liberate themselves from not just poverty, but from oppression, from imperialism, So that's a choice. And that's a choice I made to do books of that kind. So when it so happened also that this was a very vibrant time in Tanzania, when many people from all over the world were coming to Tanzania, because Tanzania offered space for these very, very, very engaging debates from all directions and all tendencies, all peoples, from South America, Latin America, from Asia, from Europe, from North America, Black people, African Americans coming to Tanzania, and some of them settling there and so on. So I thought publishing house were therefore, in a way, a voice where a channel where these voices could be channeled and heard, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, as to what Latif was saying, yes, we did play a little bit of support for the underground, but that was on a personal level. But it was just part of my own consciousness of the internationalism. But in any case, Latif was a very close friend, introduced to me by Sheikh Abdullahi Nasri, who just passed away, by the way. He was a great person in every sense and a great editor to Oxford University Press. And so we were working together. And then when they went, they were doing some work which was not, was not possible to do that work directly in Kenya. So we gave a little bit of support, not that much, but we can't go too much into details of that sort of thing. But, but so, and as I say, this was for me a part of the consciousness of what a publishing house or publishing enterprise that is progressive does. Okay, that's what I still think we need to do. There's so many issues. Okay, we're talking about democratization. We're looking at the world and seeing what's going on. And the United States is a very interesting case of what is happening in the world with democracy, where we see all elements of fascism, growing. And how do the intellectuals place themselves to fight against this? And how they, not just to fight, but to promote the other values. Publishing here comes into serious play. And one hopes that through the work, through more literature, more progressive literature, we can fight these growing anti-democratic values, anti-democratic right-wing movements that we see everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know some of those texts included some critique, certainly Shivji of Mwalimu Nyerere at the time. Did you ever encounter resistance, government resistance to what you were publishing or what you were trying to do?
Actually, we didn't really, and that's very interesting also. And one of the credits one has to give to Mwalimu was that he was ready he was confident enough in his work and himself to not worry too much about critical writings about him or even critical voices. So I don't think he particularly liked it because he didn't agree. He didn't agree with the Marxist trajectory that most of these books were. These ideas were coming from, but he was tolerant. He wanted people to read and to choose out of those ideas, including his own. In other words, he wasn't like the other people who say it's as my idea or no idea. No, right. He was prepared. Now, in fact, to just give you an example, when we were going to publish Silent Class Struggle by Issa Shivji, the chairman of our company wasn't very happy. So he went to see Mwalimu Nyerere and asked him whether he thinks we should go on publishing this book or whether they should stop us from publishing the book. Mwalimu gave him a very, very interesting reply. He said to him, look, my job is to be president. Let the publishers decide what they publish. Let them do their jobs. And that was a very, very, very good for us because it covered us almost for the rest of the time we worked. He said, let them do their work, and I'm doing my work. Yeah. So in that sense, we were very, very lucky. And
I know that Swahili language publishing was also a big part of your mission from the beginning, and in this project of also of spreading radical ideas. I'm wondering what from your view, what the Swahili language publishing scene looks like today. I mean, are you seeing African language cultural production playing a decolonizing role in East Africa in the ways that Ngugi wa Thiong'o, for instance, has always insisted?
Well, again, this question is a very critical question in our view. First of all, our people can't communicate in English, except for only a small percentage of our people can read and work in English. Very small percentage. I doubt if it's 5%. I mean, effective. There may be 10% or even 20% who can speak a little bit of English, but those are not the people who are going to read a book in English, if they have an alternative. So we are very keen to publish books in Swahili for all kinds of reasons. We think that we have a responsibility to develop our own languages, to use our languages, to develop literature in our own languages. And Swahili, in the case of Tanzania and East Africa, is the language of communication of the majority of the people. So why not, therefore, have, through this language, a literature that's also liberating? And so, literature in the sense of political literature, and as well as fiction, And so we're very much engaged in developing both. We are trying to, we have started working on producing professional books in Swahili, for example, medical books and accounting books, business books. And so we hope this way that we can also show that science is not only done in English. Science is done in every language, right. And by dispelling these myths also, it's liberating, because our education from the colonial times has always emphasized that only science comes from Europe, comes from white people,
right.
Or books. So now where we can show that no. Every language can carry science, and people can study in science in their own languages. But of course, we are having a big problem for facing a monumental resistance from those people, or I could say our own people, who under some very strange idea that English is the language of the world, Swahili of the world. That's fine, it is the Swahili of the world. But we are speaking in Tanzania. We're not in the world in English. We're not in the English world. I had just a discussion recently with Mkuki, giving me a very interesting example. One time he was speaking giving a speech in UK somewhere. There was an African author, very famous, Louis Nkosi, you might have heard of him.
Yeah.
Louis Nkosi stood up and spoke in it's all Xhosa, and then said to Mkuki, so now, how do we do? You can't answer me. Well, Mkuki was very calm and said, yes, but if I spoke your language, we would communicate. We're not communicating because you know that language, it's Xhosa, and I don't know it. But if I knew Xhosa, we would communicate. So he said, there's no issue here. We're communicating through English because we're communicating with these other people. But if they communicate in their own languages, they don't need English. We wouldn't need English if I knew your language, which of course was very interesting. But we have got people in Africa, but it is a colonial hangover, who think that in order to show that they're high academics or etc., they have to do it in English or French or Portuguese, which is completely nonsense. If they know what they do, they can express it in their own languages. Now, obviously, if they have not been working with the languages, they will have some difficulties. But so we have difficulties learning the English language, after all, or Chinese or whatever language. It's an effort.
Of course, right. I wonder, as we're starting to shift the conversation to Mkuki na Nyota in the 21st century, if we could also invite in Mkuki Bgoya, who is the press's current creative director and who also happens to be your son. I'm hoping we can kind of shift it to talking maybe some about these radical commitments as you're starting to do what they look like today, and how the terrain has changed for the press. Mkuki, welcome.
Thank you very much, Asante.
I know that international distribution and dissemination remains a pretty big problem when it comes to books from presses like yours. And you've mentioned elsewhere that the African Books Collective has been an important part of addressing that challenge. I'm just wondering, can you explain what African Books Collective is and how this process works?
Is this for me or for Walter?
Either of you. Feel free to jump in.
Okay. Maybe Walter can probably explain, the founding and the initial drive for coming together as publishers to form African Books Collective, and then I can then sort of take on, and how it operates at the moment. But I guess maybe I could just carry on with that. Currently, the collective basically helps African-based publishers distribute their books out, for the most part, outside Africa, even though they also do distribute in some parts of Africa as well. But generally speaking, they help our books reach Europe, the US, Asia, as well as dealing with sort of the logistical parts of getting books into Amazon and various libraries around around the world in terms of sort of making sure that doing contracts, etc. Those kind of collaborations with those other entities outside, which will be a bit challenging to do it when you're based in the continent. So they give us a very big presence online. They fulfill orders just like any other e-commerce website, and they've been extremely efficient at that. So they're giving African publishers an outlet, a very solid, consistent outlet, and actually, even more importantly, because they're a non-profit, most of the revenue goes back into African publishers and authors. Unlike, say, something like a place like Amazon, which usually kind of takes the lion's share of the revenue.
Right. And how has the last 2 decades of digital publishing changed the industry for you? I mean, how particularly in Tanzania, but then also, more broadly?
I mean, I think it's definitely widened the scope of. First of all, I think it has increased the output of books just generally, simply because it's come with more affordable tools. There are a lot more self-published authors, so self-published books as well, just because of the digital kind of revolution. But also there have been, I can speak for Tanzania, but I think generally speaking, there have been parts where digital books have been increasingly doing well. I think in Nigeria, they have Okada Books, which has been quite successful there, I think, and a few other parts of Africa as well. But in Tanzania, it's not been, we still have been primarily print based kind of publishers. So our market hasn't quite even though we're very, very high internet penetration,
Right.
but generally it's not been for purchasing or consuming books in that way. I mean, a lot of books are consumed through, kind of like pirated copies on WhatsApp,
Okay.
pirated PDFs on WhatsApp and other mediums. But I think the challenge for us has been to shift kind of like the attitudes towards sort of purchasing now instead of freely sharing. But I think that's also kind of a larger kind of internet culture, because a lot of the tools and the services that we use are typically free. So I think a lot of people using or accessing content through their mobile devices tend to expect the content to be free. And that doesn't excuse books either. So, but it's something we're working on. But definitely from a marketing and branding point of view, I think it has been a huge boon, because we managed to reach a lot of new audiences just simply because we're on social media and we can be able to engage directly and get direct feedback. But actually an interesting thing happened during the height of the pandemic when we released the biography of Nyerere, because at the time we were also on lockdown, and people were not going into shops, and we were just lucky enough. We had been developing our website and transitioning it into sort of to have an e-commerce capability. And it just so happened that when we're releasing this book, we were able to distribute it for the most part digitally. Even though it was in print, we were able to sell it digitally. So we were able to get orders, get people to pay for the orders, and then we'll just kind of deliver using a motorbike courier. This would have been a disaster had we not had that option, because really we would no bookshops were open. It would have been really a very difficult way to launch such a big and important work like that. So yes, there have been some gains and there have been some hurdles here and there, but generally speaking, it's been quite positive.
I'm curious to hear, 2021 was an incredible year for African writing, of course, on the international prize circuit. Something like 7 of the world's top literary prizes went to writers from the continent. But as far as I know, and you can correct me if you know otherwise, I think all of the awardees' books, except for maybe Damon Galgut's really early works, were published by European publishing houses rather than Africa-based publishers. And I'm wondering whether something like Gurna's Nobel Prize, for instance, has had or will have any positive effect in your view for East African publishing. I mean, what would have to change for this kind of international attention to African writing to benefit publishing on the continent?
Mkuki,
please. No, you go. You can start.
Okay. This is a problem that we face. Basically, is that the typical case is that an African author, young or just beginning, you writing in English or Portuguese or French, the book does very well, gets a prize either at home or a prize abroad. And then the big publishers, the UK and the US, come and offer big advances and take that author. And that author, who has been developed by the African publisher, is lost to the African publisher. Now, I don't really want to blame the authors either, because obviously there is a material benefit for them if they're done by a big publisher who has got a lot of resources to a lot of marketing and so on, and build up a name and so on. But what I think is now some of the other more progressive authors have done is that although they have published in, say, in UK or in America, I'm thinking, for example, Chimamanda, who says, okay, but I retain the Africa rights so that book can be published in Nigeria, for instance. And so the book is therefore available both in the US, where obviously the sales might be bigger or the advance is bigger, but the book will also be available in Africa. Now, I think what is a challenging situation, and one thing that I think we need to do is that African publishing, African writing, unless it gets its kind of respect at home, it cannot be respected very much abroad. For instance, we have now, effectively speaking, maybe 2 or 3 prizes for Swahili literature. Now, the Mabati Cornell is now the one that is doing very well, Swahili books.
Right.
Now, but if, for instance, you had in Tanzania or in East Africa, 1 or 2 big prizes that were respected, that were properly managed, that were the countries in East Africa were proud to sponsor these prizes. Obviously, you give literature a high profile, you give the authors high profile, and they would not then have the need to go and be appreciated abroad because they're appreciated at home. And again, if you want to give respect for your own language, that's where also big prizes, an All Africa Prize, for instance. And I think there's some prizes in Nigeria. I think there was the Wallace Soyinka. There's some some prizes in South Africa, but we don't really have a seriously good Pan-African prize in literature, which would therefore again raise the profile of African writers within Africa, so that they wouldn't have necessary to crave for the Nobel Prize. It might be still interesting, but there would still be a very good prize in Africa. So African authors would not need to necessarily go out to publish overseas. And again, if they have got big readership in the country, in Africa, again, the attraction to publish in overseas will be reduced.
Yeah.
But the whole ecosystem here we are dealing with that is not favorable to African publishers or to African authors. And African authors are finding solutions overseas, because there are no solutions available now with that kind of size at home.
Are you seeing
to add something on
Yeah,
it?
please, Mkuki, go ahead.
I think you've captured it very well. I think yes, I think what we could say is for example with Professor Guna's win, I think the biggest gain I would say is certainly for Tanzania has been that it has sort of I want to say validated, but that's not really the right word. But it has allowed for literature, particularly fiction, to be noticed in places where otherwise was sort of ignored all this time. For example, especially in the government circles. So because it was such a such a big international prize. The president spoke to Professor Guna, the president of Zanzibar spoke to, a lot of people who are in, decision-making position, where they could, possibly affect, or build on or facilitate the idea of a prize, even a national literature prize. I think now you can be able to, you can continue arguing, but I think now you'll have an ear, because there's a kind of, they're able to see the advantages that it brings to the country, because politicians have their own way of looking at these things, and I think whatever it is, I think it will be beneficial to writers here. So I think that is a really big step, which we can. As we continue, I think we'll start to see a little bit more activity in that space. But yes, like Baba was saying, until we start also writing more in our own languages, for example, because naturally, we have to build an audience. As publishers, we have to build an audience. We have to strengthen distribution, to strengthen our marketing, to make it also lucrative. So not simply, in terms of, material gains, but also I think in terms of widening the reach of the work. I mean, I think every writer wants to be widely read. I think most writers anyway, you write so that you're read. And some of the challenges that we're dealing with, just sort of getting books to reach as far and wide are also in some ways contributing to that, to making, writers aspire for, publishing in markets that are wider. But of course, the irony of that is then you are read by everybody but your own people, so it's not always necessarily as fulfilling to some. And I think, we have a lot of work to do there, and we're continuing to do it. And I think as we get better with digital distribution, I think this will slowly start changing. But yes, we need to start building platforms and prizes that are local. A Pan-African literary prize would be fantastic, because then, with prizes, there's an aspect of prestige, there's an aspect of recognition, which I think it's, once you've built it long enough, it will start attracting, more talent. So yeah, that's what I would add to that.
I'm another example of a global distribution that's starting to elevate attention to Tanzanian writing is the recent adaptation of Adam Shafi's novel Vuta Nkuvute, or Tug of War, which has been turned into a screenplay by Emil Shivji and was just, I think, screened in Zanzibar, but also has been receiving attention at various international film festivals and just won the Umaru Ganda Prize in Ouagadougou. This was also an Mkuki na Nyota title.
Yeah.
So what?
I think that, that's exactly what I think is proving the point we've been making, that there is good writing, but this good writing has to be also nurtured by good publishing. Okay, if I can say that. I started working with Shafi a long time ago, from his first, second, and this is the third book. And I think there are already other works which could be turned into film. And when people start seeing this kind of work being turned into film of course brings more people quickly, but then it also validates the work. So people will look at the picture and say, oh, let me read the book as well. So once people begin to connect between writing, between the book and the film, and now there are other areas we could exploit, by the way. Film is only one of them. I mean, there could be, I don't know, TV series, there could be animations, there could be all kinds of ways to exploit the content. And therefore, I get particularly targeting the young people, because then you want to bring in a bigger audience, which Mkuki said. You want to create a bigger market, a bigger audience. And that's how you attract younger people who are probably not so keen on reading necessarily in the way we read, but would combine to appreciate literature through these other media. So it's all exciting, actually.
Are you starting to see that happen at all with Shafi's text? I mean, in the wake of the success of Tug of War, are you seeing a boost in sales, or is it too soon to say?
No, it hasn't been a huge boost yet, but definitely we are seeing a lot of renewed interest. And because this book came out in 95, I believe, and a lot of a huge audience which is online today was probably very young then.
Right.
And also as a result, this film, and it hasn't screened in Dar es Salaam, or rather in the mainland, if I can say. So we are also expecting to to widen that sort of audience, because I think here what film does to books is just it allows a book or a story to reach new audiences who probably wouldn't have likely kind of stumbled on that novel. So I think once, because the first screening in Tanzania was in Zanzibar, very, very successful, very great, very, very good turnout. And I think there's going to be a screening this year on the mainland. And I think we'll start to see even more. But definitely there's a renewed interest. There's, a lot of people are asking, we're having conversations around the stories, around the characters, around, actually, even more importantly, around it has allowed the centering of a Tanzanian or Swahili story in kind of our consciousness, because a lot of time there's a huge audience of Netflix watchers in Tanzania, and all these, all these different films from all over. There's on TV you see these soap operas from Malaysia or China or Mexico, like telenovelas and things like that are translated into Kiswahili. But I think the conversation we're seeing now is like, wow, I didn't realize that we have such amazing stories, and people can relate, at a very, very deep kind of almost visceral level with these stories. And I think that's a very interesting conversation that is happening now, because you know about our stories, but sometimes when you see it on the big screen, and it kind of it hits you at a at a place where you're familiar with, because you're used to watching a lot of films. So when you see one of yours, it's kind of it really gets you thinking, and maybe hopefully gets you to pick up a book, and hopefully it will inspire even more filmmakers to sort of look inwards, because I think that's always been a challenge. They forget that there's a lot of material here to work with.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you whether you have other literary texts in mind that you've published that you think are sort of poised to kind of garner this interest in adaptation or a translation.
Yes, quite a few. I mean, I would say for sure Mungu Akopeshwi by Zainab Bahrun would be a good candidate. It's obviously it's a newer story set in much more modern times, but it's and I see it, even from a budget point of view, I don't think it will need a lot of budget, a huge budget to make it into a beautiful film. I mean, there's some old classics like Mirathi Atari. No, I mean, there's quite a few very good books that could easily kind of turn into films. But I think even to add to that, one of the mediums that we I'm very passionate about, and I would like to develop some more, is graphic novels. Because the advantage of graphic novels is that you can really you can do what a film can do without the budget of a film, almost. So it allows for kind of stories that would otherwise be too expensive to make into films. Sci-fi, stories in Kiswahili especially, and kind of all these imaginative, speculative fiction, which could maybe otherwise be a bit difficult to do just because it's a bit, they tend to be expensive. But I think we can explore some of those themes using a medium like a graphic novel, and so on. So I think, it's exciting. But yeah, maybe Baba may have some.
Yes, I just wanted to actually say that I think this is going to be a very exciting beginning of doing cinematic work with film work with quite a number. But I can think of almost at least 10 books that I would immediately think they had capacity for. Even short films, not necessarily long films, things like Alionja Pepo, these plays that we've got a series of plays that we published. For instance, even Semene Osman, for example, translation of the Lomanda, the
Money Order, Hawala Fedha.
Yeah, Hawala Fedha.
Right, the money order, right, yeah.
We've got quite a few plays like that, which could be turned into, 15, 20, 30-minute films, short films, to continue to attract people towards linking literature with film, basically wakening up people to the consciousness of creativity and so on. That's a very interesting area that I think who can, our company will be looking into, because I think my own experience certainly is that when you can see a story and a book and see it in the film, then you are being called upon, you are engaging in a whole, what can I say, movement of creative movement, so to speak. And that's extremely interesting as far as I can see in terms of building also on creating this market for cultural productions, so it's interesting, it's really exciting.
If I may just add on that, I think there's one thing that is interesting, especially when we start adapting books to films. I think we are showing the possibility of our stories on screens, and I think one thing that we forget is there's a whole young generation which is, for the most part, consuming everything through screens. Most of the entertainment is through screens, and for them, something to be valid, even if it's news, even anything, their reality is through screens. And I think, when they start seeing these stories come alive, even if it's not a big screen, it could be a screen of their mobile phone, it could be a little TikTok video, it could be, a kind of a clip on WhatsApp, so it doesn't always necessarily have to be the big screen. But I think once we start moving these stories onto screens, they become so kind of normalized, and I think once we start normalizing them to take sort of the novelty out of it, then we really, I think we can start to see a lot more work done, because there'll be a lot more players, and I would even say a lot more writing in the process, and a lot of seeking of older works, and bringing them back into play. So I think there's something that this will inspire, beyond just the the normal film format, movies, but also maybe smaller kind of short pieces, but just the kind of the validation of the screen that the young people seem to be more attuned to.
Yeah. Has Mkuki na Nyota ever experimented with audiobooks? I'm thinking about, a sort of another immersive medium, and since, at least when I was living in Tanzania, radio was a ubiquitous form everywhere, and I wonder if there would be a market for audiobooks for that reason.
Yes, actually we have not done audiobooks yet. But it's something that we've been kind of playing around with the ideas and sort of deciding when to start. But I think definitely this year we will get some audiobooks out. But and I agree. I think we are a radio nation. Like there are a lot of community radios, and even though things have changed quite substantially now with the internet, but still we're even seeing podcasts starting to make a little bit of a dent into the market. They're kind of late to come into Tanzania, but now there are people who are starting to listen to podcasts. So that also opens up, avenues for serialized kind of content,
Right, yeah.
In terms of, in episodic kind of formats. So yeah, this is something that we're going to be doing a lot as we move. We're going to start this year, but we're gonna do more. I think obviously the challenge still is in somewhat, how do you then get them in such a way that people can be able to purchase them, even if for very small fee, but just sort of be able to pay for that content, so that some of the, so that we can get royalties for the authors, and we can sort of pay at the very least pay for the production costs of doing this.
Of course.
So this is some of the things we're thinking about. But definitely audiobooks will be are definitely coming 2022.
I'd like to just add in there. I think some of these things we could do better if we had a kind of national support like sort of like the Arts Council in UK or similar organizations in other places, because many of these projects, you'll be doing them on experimental basis, and they are not likely to make money. And then we have got also, unfortunately, a serious problem of piracy. And this one very discouraging reality. If you think, for instance, okay, let's do a series of audiobooks, and then some people just go and pirate them, and they go and produce all sorts of little things that, and it's all over. You don't get anything from it, although you have invested a lot of work, first of all, in publishing the books and then putting them back into audio format. So, and I'm not sure yet if there are very secure solutions, solutions for security enough to ensure that the publisher and the author get something back. We'll try to make it as inexpensive as possible and available to people as possible. And Mkuki did make the point earlier that our internet exposure has been that quite a lot of the things that people go to see, to watch are free. And so people assume that once they've paid for their bundle, that the rest is free. It should be sold. Right. And how to break that mentality is going to take quite some time. But again, the solutions we could find at a technical level, but also support from the state by strengthening, for instance, the law on copyright, protection of copyright, and helping us to weed that out, because it's terrible. I understand, for instance, in Nigeria, up to about 40-45% of all the books on the market are pirated. That's really
Incredible.
Really discouraging. And it's becoming quite serious also in Tanzania. It hasn't gone to the level of Nigeria, but the more we produce, the more we are going to see also the pirates coming, play a very negative role in this.
Well, I was going to ask you, just as a final question, which you've already sort of started to answer, what in your view are the urgent changes that need to take place within publishing and the book industry today?
Mkuki, answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, a stronger protection of copyright. I think that is important, because it allows copyrighted works to generate enough revenue to then be, for that revenue to also be plowed back into creating even more works, whether it's through obviously the revenue for the publishing house in order to develop other works, but also for the authors themselves to be able to live off of their work, so they can be comfortable enough to continue creating more work. So I think that is absolutely important, and that's only the government can be able to do that. I'll give you an example. It's photocopying of books is rampant in universities and schools generally, and for books that you can be able to get into schools, those would have been the books that essentially subsidize all these other literary works which do not have necessarily or do not bring the revenue that you would need. For example, if you want to publish poetry, which typically doesn't sell much really anywhere in the world for that matter, then it would be nice to be able to raise some funds from selling as textbook, and then you can be able to fund these other kind of works of cultural value, which would be hard to do otherwise. But if those few titles that you have that would fund a lot of other titles are also pirated, and you get nothing from them, then that's you're really in a serious problem. So I think seriousness in copyright protection and enforcement, that is definitely very important. And then I think support for cultural institutions, because like Mzee said, I think mobilizing some funds to allow publishing houses doing cultural work to be able to experiment a little bit more, to have the kind of security to develop works in that way. I think we spoke about the national prize. It would have been very good for something like that to be installed by the Ministry of Culture, for example, and be kind of incubated there and funded by them, which have gone. It would do a lot more towards sort of developing a lot more writers and nurturing new ones. We need more libraries we need more funding for buying books for libraries, because our libraries now, we're building a lot of schools and libraries, but they're empty. They do not have books, especially books that are outside of the sort of the curriculum, because I think we've put so much emphasis on textbooks, and we forget that really reading culture and intellectual culture isn't really built by textbooks. In order to invest in reading, and we need to start promoting and buying and producing more children books, so children have material that is relevant for them to read, and all the way up to adults. So I think as you can see, all of these are essentially the tasks that I'm assigning to the government. That's pretty much their job.
Just one last point to add there, if I may. The whole question of our African economies, for the start, do not favor people's working in the cultural medium. For instance, the banking system. How can you, for instance, borrow money to do publishing at interest rates of 18 to 20%? But those are the interest rates going in our countries. So publishers do not have access to capital, working capital at reasonable interest rates. I mean, in the North, in these Western countries, 1, 2, 3, 4%. Some places like Japan, where there's zero interest, on borrowing, and so on. I mean, because one of the issues here, we are talking about the prices of books, and the prices of books are obviously related directly to the cost of production and so on, and the kind of financing. For instance, also the taxes, for example, taxes on paper and taxes on machinery, they make it so expensive that, for instance, it's cheaper sometimes to print books way in other countries in Asia than to print locally. And also, if the prices of books are high, then of course you give piracy reason to exist, because the pirates don't incur the cost of production. So they can just, whip up your good book, and they don't care about quality. And that goes out at half of the price. So obviously people will go for that. So, but if for example, publishing could be, if the banking system, the interest rates were reasonable, 4 or 5%, for instance, and the printing was available in good quality at reasonable prices, for instance, the same kinds of prices you would get from Middle East or Asia, then of course the incentive for piracy is not there. To produce books at such a low enough price that there would be no need to pirate. So all these are issues which ought to be looked into by government through serious book policies. And again, we don't have even that, the kind of national book policies that are really serious. We don't have those, because even funding, there could be some way to create funds for borrowing. I mean, there has been cultural funds where, for instance, publishers, producers, any kind of books could have access to funding. Not gratis, I don't mean, but certainly reasonable interest rates. That kind of issue. But that's fundamentally the economy as a whole, I guess.
Bgoya, Mkuki, thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Asante. Thank you very much.
I wish you so much luck, and I'm looking forward to these audiobooks, to these film adaptations, to all of the the up and coming.